like, what if we approach church in a interest of others mentality?
Hi, welcome back to another week of Behind and Beyond. I'm Allison, and this week we're starting to dive into the church series, and we have Amanda Beggs here with us today. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks.
It's been a while. I feel like it's been a while since you've been on the podcast. Before
like
Christmas.
December. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have you back.
Yes.
Well, I thought we'd just jump right in with an icebreaker, of course, but a relevant one that goes to the church. You have grown up in the church. You've been a part on staff since forever? I don't know, college or something at Northway. So I was curious, part of the thing about community is that it's very awkward and messy, and there's a little bit of, I think, you kind of have to just choose to live into the awkwardness in order to be a part of a community. There's no one who feels completely comfortable all the time. And so I'm curious about maybe one of your most awkward or funny moments that you can think back on in your life of the church.
So many. And you're so right. That comes with the territory of everything, but especially church. I think one that comes to mind was like a broad ranging experience, but there was one specific time. So when Brad and I were first married, we were part of a couple small group. It was really our first experience into that sort of small group. And it was one of our first gatherings, maybe the second gathering with this group. So no one knew each other pretty well. Some people were brand new to small groups in general. And there was a couple characters in that group that I just was not expecting. So the same small group meeting, so the same day, I think two awkward things happened. At one point, we're just in the middle of conversation. People are sharing, and one of the women gets up and exits to our kitchen. And I can see from the doorway that she's just standing there rooting through our refrigerator, which totally fine. But I'd be
so mortified. My refrigerator is I just am horrible at cleaning my refrigerator.
Yes. Well, back then we probably had nothing in our refrigerator and just I don't know. We had snacks. I don't know what was happening, but that was just oh wow, we're at that level, and I don't even know. I barely know your last name, or we're all family. And so
life together, doing life together.
Yeah, refrigerator. Mi casa, su casa. But then another member of that group the same day, back in conversation after the woman sat down from the refrigerator episode, we were talking about a way different topic, and out of nowhere, he said, okay, I just want to know where everyone stands on predestination. Ready? Go. And he'd point to each person and make them answer on the spot. We were the leaders, obviously not very good leaders at that point if we had lost control, but it was just, there were so many...
What did you answer?
I don't even remember. I probably tried to change the subject because it was wild. But it was that small group in particular had so many just moments like that were awkward and made me realize this is not as easy or cut and dry or straightforward as naive Brad and Amanda thought. So.
Yeah. Well, and that is we will dive into this, I guess. But this is such a part of church life that I find I think about so much, because I think so often when we think church is where we want to come together, we want it to be easy because we all just naturally fit together.
Yes.
And I don't really think that's the design of the church. I think it's really meant to be a group of individuals who maybe have nothing in common except the spirit inside of them coming together for the sake of the gospel, and that we're going to kind of in that process have differences, and those differences continue to make us more and more in like Christ,
yes. Yeah, so. No, I know we're in icebreaker time, but just to jump off of that, I think early on, I thought community and friendship were synonymous, and church community and friendship. And sometimes they are, you connect with someone and we're friends and we share something at a friendship level, but also at a sisters in Christ level. But more often, community is supernatural. Binding together of people who have nothing in common. And that, to me, took me a while to realize that, I think, and even just pursue opportunities to be in a small group with people who weren't just in my same life stage, and people who had different perspectives, and the messiness and kind of rough edges that creates. But that's where the gospel shines. Anybody can be friends outside of Jesus even. And it takes something much more powerful to bring together people who would not ordinarily fit together.
Yeah. Well, hey, look at that icebreaker. Just
look at that. A deep, meaningful icebreaker. But I can't move on without knowing you have many awkward moments, I'm sure. Not because you're awkward.
I do,
because you've also been in church your whole life is what I meant by that. You have great stories, always.
Yeah, it's probably both. Probably because I've been in church a long time and because I am awkward. No, I think that, my take, I was actually just training someone in guest services recently, and we were talking a little bit about this because I was saying my perspective is everyone is awkward. Everyone's a little bit uncomfortable, like meeting someone, being known, starting a conversation with someone they don't know very well. And that when we're in the church and we're serving people, especially in a guest services position, but I think even as people who call Northway our home, we are giving the gift of taking the awkwardness on ourselves and just kind of like, okay, I'm going to go first. And so it is awkward a lot of times to initiate with people. But to me, it's my gift to you. Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to be a little bit weird in how I do this, but I'm going to try to bridge a gap so that you don't have to be like you new person or you person who maybe doesn't yet have community here, doesn't have to be the one to do it. And so, I love that. But I can give you a story to that point because I was telling the story actually in the same training. One of the practices I have is that when I see people at Northway that I don't already know, I'll just go up to them and kind of say something as simple as like, hey, I don't think I've met you yet. I'm Allison. And then maybe I'll say, how long have you been coming to Northway?
Sure.
And then, so one day I was serving kind of in the cafe area, and a woman I didn't think I knew came up to the coffee bar. And I was like, hey, I said that line, hey, I'm Allison. Yep. I don't think I've met you before. How long have you been coming Northway? And she just looked me dead in the eyes and goes, I've been to your house.
No.
And I was like, oh my gosh, did you get a haircut? Yep. And she's like, no, I did not. And I felt horrible about it. What happened was, though, it was small group kind of kickoff season. I was leading 2 small groups in a week. Yeah. So I would have like one on a Monday and one on a Wednesday. And it was a lot of young adults. So like on Monday night and it was the beginning, we were just getting to know each other. So maybe like on Monday, there were like, 15 young women, all in their 20s, who showed up at my house that I was meeting for the first time. Yes. And then on Wednesday, a similar thing happened. And so she had been in my home, but hadn't come back to the small group, and I just didn't really know her well. And I just felt like, but I kind of just live by a motto of like, each Sunday I'm probably going to put my foot in my mouth at least one time.
Definitely.
And and I'm just going to like be like, Lord, it is my offering. Yes. I hope you redeem this, and is my attempt at building community with people. So,
and no matter what she said after that, it would never be as awkward as your comment. So she would be a complete ease. You're just putting people at ease. So
that's my hope. Everyone messes it up sometimes, and but the heart
is there,
right?
Yes.
So okay. Well, I'm curious though there's always awkwardness in this, but there's also real fruit and reward, I think, of being a part of a church community. And so I'm curious what is maybe one of the most beautiful moments or inspiring moments from your time in church life.
So many. I think that's what I hope will come out in this series, but also I did not have time for it. But I think so many of us have awkwardness or hurt or a whole host of things associated with church. But in my experience, at least, there's been so much more. Like if the scales were, it would be so much more in the favor of beauty and goodness. Our first Rooted group experience, when Rooted first started at Northway, was really special. And I actually just ran into one of the members from that original group, and we were still talking about it, that there's like nothing, it feels like, would ever touch that. It was all of our first times through Rooted, kind of in that context, and someone took communion for the first time in our living room, like for the very first time in their life, had never taken communion. And it was just, it reminded me maybe how it felt in Acts, like that level of just like simplicity and mess, and also beauty of everyone cheering that person on. And they had also like accepted Christ, that same person in that group. And it was just like, wow, this is powerful stuff
Yeah.
if we live into it. And so that was like the first thing that popped into my mind.
Yeah.
Even just thinking about group life. How about you?
I was thinking about communion as well, actually. I don't know if this is the most beautiful or the most inspiring. But the most recent one is actually, I talked to you a little bit about this, but I didn't tell you the like beautiful part. I just told you the awkward part. I was in West Virginia this past week with my mom and dad. I've talked about some here, but my mom has ALS and is in a wheelchair and cannot use her hands or legs. And so we went to the church I grew up in, and my parents both my parents came from families that had kind of gone to church. Both of them, both their parents in different situations, different churches, had found something they disagreed with the pastor on at some point and had stopped going, kind of in both my parents' youth, like, middle school, high school ages. And then they had really never gone back to church. When they got married and had me, they decided it was time to find a church home and really found one and have stuck. They've been there my whole life. So we moved to the area when I was like 2. So 38 years they have been a part of this one church. And it has gone through a million things, a million hard times, beautiful moments, things like that. So anyway, we were visiting, we went to church. They had communion. The way they do communion at their church is that everyone kind of walks up to the front and they break off a piece of bread and you dip your bread in the grape juice and eat it. And one of my kids was with me and it was his first time ever doing communion like that. And so this is the part I told you. I don't know if they just thought, oh, he's like a cute kid. They gave him an extra. It's always a treat in this church to get like the real, like the bread.
Bread. Yeah.
And they gave him like this big chunk of bread. He takes it. He reaches his whole hand deep down in this like goblet and swirls it around. And it is like a sponge just soaking up. He pulls it up with his fingers like stained purple. And it's just dripping grape juice everywhere. And he is like trying to shove it in his mouth. There is grape juice all down his shirt. But it was the sweetest. And I'm like laughing and kind of embarrassed walking back to my seat. But my mom, who's in her wheelchair, I'm watching her and she's just tearing up watching him like receive communion at the church that they've been a part of for so long. And then I think the part that was like so beautiful though was as communion ended, 2 of the ushers who were helping administer communion walked over to where Mom was seated in her wheelchair. And I tried to be like, oh, I can help her. And they were like, no, please. It would be Rosemary, it'd be my honor to serve this to you. And like even just, and they were crying and she was crying and she can't move her hands. She can't. So they had to take the bread, dip it in the cup and literally feed it into her mouth for her. And it was just such a beautiful picture of the body of Christ and the power of the gospel and people coming together. And also I just think I've seen the church care so deeply for them and the beauty of longevity in a place with, she's known these people who've had her the communion. She probably like rocked their babies, and now they're like feeding her communion. And it was just a really beautiful moment, even this past weekend.
You obviously care deeply for them, but live here and to know that they have like a true family there.
Well, and I think it's just the beauty of the church, capital C, global, that I thought like, we'll be in heaven with these people, and just how beautiful it is that we are together. This brings us together. Nothing in common except the gospel of Christ. And so
that's beautiful. We could just end right there. That's
well, let's talk about the church though. There's so much to talk about.
I know this like is my dream podcast with you. Actually, we could just
this is just like a normal like Saturday night conversation between the two of us. So okay, but I know this series has been on your heart for a long time. Maybe if you can explain this, you pitched the series and outlined it. Maybe explain what that means a little bit and kind of maybe with that, why?
Yeah, I think this has been on my heart a long time, and it started with my own personal journey and some things I was reading and studying, and just this, like our ecclesiology, just like, theology about church has become so weak and so watered down, even personally, what I expect, like what you just described, that beautiful moment with your mom. That's what we should expect. Like that, there's so much there that represents. And that had just become, and I'm not talking, this is not, just like I said in my sermon, this is not a critique, this is not criticism, this is not like veiled, commentary about Northway or any other church. It's just my own expectation and belief about church. And so thinking about how do we talk about the church, so that being true, and then also reading some other things that in today's cultural moment, it is harder for people to believe that the church is good, beautiful, and true as opposed to Jesus. So they might even be able to say, yes, I don't need like a big apologetic for Jesus. I can see how there's value in following him. What I cannot see is how there's anything redeeming about the institution of the church. And so if I was sharing the gospel with you and I espouse that the church is valuable, that would be a barrier for you for really understanding. And so those two things for me, like my own sort of picture that's become weakened, and then also knowing that our culture is in this time where the church, and for some valid reasons, so that's not even, but just is this kind of broken, useless institution. How do we return to what the church is? And then thinking, okay, well, there's all these metaphors for the church in the New Testament that are all similar in their own way, but also all unique. And then also getting down to the point that, but they're all rooted in Jesus, the identity I talked about this weekend. And so if Jesus is these things, if we know who Jesus is, looking through these metaphors, then who does that make us? And so really rebuilding our identity and understanding on who Jesus is, and then who he's called the church to be, and like what a high calling. What, like, just like I said this weekend, these metaphors, like if that identity is what we lived into or thought possible, how incredible. So that really, for me, just was a journey throughout the fall of thinking and praying and kind of working through all this material, and then being really excited for us to do that. And then that happening on the heels of 14 days of prayer and fasting as the church, that sort of just happened. And I think was the Lord being really intentional about ordering those things for us too.
I loved how you talked about our identity, how we always say what our identity in Christ is, but what is our identity as a collective, as the church? What is? Yes. I've never done that. I don't think. Like, I don't think I've ever heard
neither.
That I all the time in all this Bible studies have been in a million things about my own personal identity in Christ, and never once about my identity as part of the body.
Yes,
that was really beautiful how you broke that down.
Thanks. Yeah, it is striking. I mean, you can't, and those things stand on their own. Like they need no explanation is valuable, but that just even that picture is so overwhelming. So I'm excited to every week. Just maybe I didn't say this. This the way the series is structured is that we'll hit one of those metaphors every week. And so, what does it mean that Jesus is the good shepherd? What does it mean that Jesus is the head of the body, our older brother, all those things? And really kind of take the nuance of each metaphor and how to apply that identity.
Well, is there anything from this week that you wish you had more? I know we're kind of kicking off the series, and it's probably so hard to kind of like pare it all down. And I feel like we'll get into this. I felt like you had so many good one-liners that I was like, this one line could be its own sermon. So I'm going to give you some space to like maybe fill some of those out.
That's great.
But anything that you
there was so much. About. I felt like I could have talked for hours and just tried to tell myself we still have 8 more weeks to talk about this, so we don't have to get it all into 1 week, which is the fun part about kicking it off. But I had those exchanges that we see in the book of Acts, and wanted to highlight 2 specifically that I felt like the Lord was speaking to our church in this moment of time. But I did have a third one that I sort of said in the introduction but didn't get to, and it's trading, consuming just content for service, and rooted into that idea of individualism, this belief that we've adopted. And even I've caught myself, like the more I've studied and looked into it, I'm like, okay, I see how this plays out, is really believing that the telos, like the center core purpose of the church, is our own individual spiritual self-actualization. So the church exists to support my climb. The church exists so that I become like true to my purpose or who God's calling me to be. And that is a fruit of following Jesus, but that's not the root from which it comes. Like the purpose of the church is the glory of God and the good of our neighbor. And so when we are living out those things and pursuing those things, but like by default, then we will become, more like Christ. But it's not, because as soon as it becomes about my spiritual self-actualization, it is very easy to say, did I get something out of this sermon or not? If I didn't get anything out of it, I'm out. If this group doesn't serve my needs, I'm out. Or why would I even be a part of a small group?
I'm done.
Someone's eating out of my fridge, I'm done. I'm quitting the small group. Yeah. But even the way we approach small group, like, what am I going to get out of that? Is so often that's like the root question of consuming content. And it could be, what might God might have for me there for someone else? So even in a group, why does God want me there? Or it's not just about content from the best speaker, the best pastor. It is a localized thing. And, Jesus served Paul, connecting that in Philippians 2 to how we should not look only after our own interests, but also to the interests of others. And so that, like, what if we approach church in a interest of others mentality? And so that would have been my third point, but no time for that. But I do think the consuming of culture and self-actualization is really a root of just our thinking that's flawed.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You started off your sermon with the story of Alex Honnold. Doing the free solo climbing, and use that really as a thread of the free solo faith throughout your sermon. I am curious, you kind of talked about this, but I'm curious about even how you think individualism has maybe impacted our culture's relationship with just institutions at large over the past 30, 40 years. It's not just only a church issue. And then I think, obviously, we are examining the church, though. And so how is it impacting the church today?
I think individualism in terms of institutions, they're not something of value. They're not something that we need. Institution itself is a dirty word in many circles. Like, and again, there's reasons for that. There's things that are broken inside of our cultures and inside of institutions. But whereas maybe 50 years ago, institutions were the center of society and really what shaped things and ordered things and
brought people together. Bowling Alone, have you heard? I feel like the book keeps
I read that in college.
Referenced. Did
you?
I
did. Yes.
Yeah. So this book called Bowling Alone by, what is his name? Robert Putnam.
Yeah, Putnam.
Russell Moore just interviewed him recently about this topic because I think it's just, I keep hearing it come up again and again, this idea of that the places of gathering, Bowling Alone, bowling clubs have gone out of fashion. And so there's this idea of like, there's no community like watering hole kind of, or gathering places where we're coming together. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, I think you and I have talked about this, but a book that really influenced me was by a man named Brad Edwards. And he wrote a book called The Reason for Church. And it's why the church still matters in an age of radical individualism and anxiety. And he really unpacks the idea of institutions, of individualism, but how individualism has these core defeater beliefs inside of it. And so just looking how, when I said that's become the air that we breathe, the more I learn and read about it, the more I see how that has even seeped into my own thinking or teaching or reading of scripture. But all of that is to say, individualisms in terms of institutions, I think at best, like even in our most charitable interpretation, are just, they're not something that's necessary. Like, it's nice, if we're talking about the church in specific, it adds some things to my life. It's nice, but it is not necessary to my walk with Christ. I can do that without an institution. I can do that by listening to podcasts. I can do that with my friends who follow Jesus. I can do that with being in general community with Christians, but not a part of the local church, like the institution of the local church. So it really has diminished the value of what we look for in the church.
Yeah. So how do you evaluate that in yourself? If you're like, I think that's such a curious question, because I am like, I see that. I can see that in myself. I can see but in a kind of like foggy way, because I feel like it's so deeply baked into me of this sort of individual, even what you're talking about a little bit of the way to think about like, well, the church is here to serve me, serve my self-growth, help me achieve whatever level of growth I'm desiring. And I think about it kind of in a consumeristic way, like how is it helping me do that? But that's just so baked into like the way we think about everything, really. Yes. And so, and how we decide if something's valuable or not, and how it serves me as an individual. And so how do you begin to like consider, well, actually, you know, is this church like a healthy place for me to commit to and invest in? And then, because you do have to, especially if you're like looking for a church or whatever, you kind of you do have to evaluate that.
Yes.
Versus like, am I just being only thinking about myself here, and how, like, does that make sense what I'm asking? Like, how do I navigate those two those conflicting tensions?
I think that's, because it is important. And I would have loved to talk about this too, even when you look at the book of Acts. There are elements even right off that show like a gospel-centered church. And there is the preaching of the word. There is the centrality of communion or the Lord's table. There's church discipline. There's sharing with one another, like some accountability and vulnerability, I guess would be the way I'd say those two things. And so that should be there. If there was something contrary to Scripture's teaching, if they meaning the church you're evaluating, you know, are pointing to things other than the gospel, even in their Sunday sermons, if it's just moralism or whatever, that, like, those are good. I think it's wise to have critical thinking. It's not wise to have a critical spirit. And so I would use that maybe as the distinctive. But once I use my critical thinking to evaluate, yes, this is a gospel-centered church, then my critical heart needs to be put aside, and there's a commitment, like a covenant level commitment. When you think of the church being your brothers and sisters, that's not something that you just like sever off quickly, or a part of your body is not like, well, don't need that pinky, it's out, you know. And so I think that's where we start to see our individualism. As soon as something doesn't serve me, I'm out of here. And so there is good evaluation to, is this a good fit? But I think once you've evaluated those things, while our tendency tends to be, let's go here, let's go find another church. Even the phrase church shopping that's become so prevalent, you know, we've all said it, what that communicates about what we're looking for. And then truly asking the Lord, do you have something for me here? Maybe there's something for me to give. I know you and I have had conversations even about staying at different churches at our different points in our lives. God had something for us there. One, that he was using to shape us, and two, maybe that we were meant to give, and feeling that strongly. And we are shaped, yes, by like good teaching and good content and all of that, but we're much more shaped by, I have to forgive this person. I have to, you know, be patient or practice generosity, or those are much more refining than, I love everything about this and I'm just going to stay because it's giving me good content.
I had a seminary professor who just seminary is such a flood, like a hose of information, that there's so much I can't, like, very few things actually stick in my brain. But for some reason, this has stuck so deeply with me. I think because it challenged like the way I thought about the church so deeply. But he had just said it's a covenant. When you enter into a church, in a sense, you make a covenant with those people the same way you would make a covenant in a wedding. And so there is a sense of like, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, that you need to think about church membership. Now, again, of course, if there's just like in a marriage, there are reasons to end a covenant.
Yes.
But you also need to hold on to it with a tightness of, I am going to commit to these people because I believe that it's in that commitment that refining happens. And there are going to be better and worse seasons in that. And sometimes the worst, as hard as it may be, is actually what is most sanctifying us. So I don't know. It's just been it was a shift for me in the way I thought about church membership.
I think that's so good and so needed. I know we could probably both say this in terms of just longevity somewhere, really committing, much like in a marriage, but the blessing of being somewhere over the long haul. And even what you shared about your mom and, you know, maybe rocking their babies and here they are serving her. Like the beauty of that is richer and deeper than I could ever find just hopping from this church to that church to that church. And we miss that. I think we miss something when we're quick to leave.
Okay. trying to watch our time.
Yep.
And we've really gone long here on some of these podcasts.
Rein it in.
But I do want to give a little bit of time here for you just to expand maybe on a couple things. I felt like you gave a definition of the church that I just kind of want to repeat because I feel like it's worth meditating on. The church is the people of God, united to Christ and bound to one another by the Spirit, living a shared life for the glory of God and the good of our neighbors. And I was thinking, I was like, I bet if somebody just casually was like, hey, Allison, what is the church? I might have said the first clause of that sentence. I might just be like, oh, the church is the people of God. I think the rest of that is incredibly important to shaping our theology about the church. And I honestly, I was like, everyone needs this on a card. We need to put this on our mirrors. We need to understand what the church is, because this is how you make that commitment. You can't make a commitment to something you don't understand what it is even meant to be. And so I'm curious for you, is there a section of that is most convicting, or something that like, did you write that? Had you read? Yeah, you wrote that. Yeah. Of course you did, because you're.
No, well, writer. I mean, taking bits and pieces from everywhere, but
yeah, what part of that most stands out to you?
Man, it's hard to boil that down. I do think the people of God part is important. God has always called a people to Himself, whether it be Adam and Eve, the nation of Israel, Jesus and the disciples, now us as the church. So it's something that God institutes. I think is really important. This isn't, and I think I said this sort of offhand, but it's not something man created, like, oh, we need to, this is a club, so we all follow Jesus and now we're making a church institution. Mm-hmm. Nope, this was God calling out people from the very beginning. But to me, I think the most powerful phrase based on what we just talked about is united to Christ. That if I am united to Christ and you are united to Christ, we have fellowship with God and one another. Like, we are connected forever to each other, like inextricably intertwined. And so that, but then I could say something about every phrase at this point. So that's, and the glory of God and good of our neighbor, I think is easy to lose in the whole.
I think that's the good of our neighbor, even, I think was such an important part in my mind of it, because to even counteract that individualism.
Yes.
Like, I think if we think of church as just a place I go and I get fed for the week, and then I kind of continue to grow spiritually, and then I go off and continue to do the things that better me.
Yes.
And I don't think about how this is impacting my neighbor and my neighborhood. We're also missing the purpose of the church.
Yes. And I think the neighbor is the people in my church. Like, this is for their good, like not just mine, and also for the good of our communities and our literal neighbors, that there's an impact when the church is in a community. There's an impact when I'm in my house next to my neighbors because of my church and how that shaped me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what would you say to those, and maybe we'll have more time to break this down as the series continues, but what would you say to those who are carrying church hurt, and so are maybe perhaps timid about recommitting or getting involved, or maybe cynical about it? What would be your...
Yeah. And I do think we definitely will get into this. And I had a big initial portion that I wanted to speak to that sort of off the bat. And I thought, no, let's just let it, I think that'll come out naturally throughout the series. But what I would say, looking at the New Testament, whether it's the Apostle Paul or even the book of Acts, but we'll stick with Paul. Paul experienced hurt and offense at the hands of the church. There's a verse in Timothy that he said, no one came to my defense. They all left. And it's so sad. Like, just thinking of betrayal and abandonment and criticism and just the different phrases in the different letters he wrote. And so I think what's so important, what's so interesting about Scripture is that it doesn't deny the flaws of the church. So you don't read the New Testament and say, like, wow, look how amazing it is. Like, it stops at Acts 2 and that's all that we get about the church. In all of the epistles, we see a very flawed church. And even in Paul's own statements, someone who has been hurt by the church. Yeah. And so it's not denying the pain or the hurt or the brokenness, but it's also not defining the church by that. It's defining it by what Jesus said. And so I think to someone who's been hurt, I'm sorry. And so, yes, haven't we all? And I know that's at different levels. And some have been deeply hurt or even abused, at the extreme, abused and that sort of thing. And that's horrific and terrible, but that's not how Jesus defines the church. And so I think it's recognizing in our own thinking where we're using that to define something, but also at the same time never denying. We don't want to deny someone's hurt or not look for healing in that hurt or even reform when things have gone off track. Like, it's important for us to look at all of that. But in no sense from reading the New Testament is there, look at this hurt and now walk away. And Jesus is making everything new, and he's like purifying his bride. When we talk about, I think a lot of the hurt conversation will fit into looking at Jesus as the bridegroom, but he's working to present her spotless without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish. And so as Jesus is working that out, like, he will be true to that promise. And one day, just like everything else, the church will be made new.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of our job as believers is to then work for reform where we see things that need called out or things that are not of Christ in the church. Right.
And I think we see that in Paul too. Like, there's plenty of times he's calling out greed or division or sexual immorality, you know, like there's call out after call out. So it's not being quiet and it's not ignoring. It's just not defining by.
I think the line from your sermon that maybe stood out to me the most, or just like rattled around in my brain.
I'm so intrigued. I can't wait.
I don't think you'll be surprised. I think it's where you said it's maybe not that we're expecting too much of the church, but that we are expecting too little. And I'm curious for you. We can kind of end with this question. I think, how has your expectation of the church grown through the study that you've been doing, and what do you hope for us?
Well, that's a good question. That line is like sort of borrowed from C.S. Lewis, just talking about it's not that our desires are too strong, but they're too weak, just in general in terms of the Christian life. And to just expect something to be like content that fuels me is a very weak expectation. But to expect like to be the people of God where God dwells in our midst and we experience him together, that's what I hope for us, that it would be every time we gather in a small group or a large group or, you know, around a table, that we expect like we are a part of what Jesus is doing and we see that and come ready for that, instead of right now it seems like that's the surprise when that happens, but the norm is just everything else. And what would it look like if that were normal? Like, that would be a beautiful, wild thing. And I think we have a chance, even like in this cultural moment, to be a light for something other than individualism or just like the God of me, and to show people the glory of God for the good of our neighbors. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for the series. Me too. Thank you for helping lead us through it and getting it started. And I look forward to ongoing conversations. Yeah, me too. For the next couple of weeks. Thanks for being here. See ya.